Gentlemen, we do have an update on the Russia-Ukraine war situation, with Biden authorizing the first use of U.S. supplied long-range missiles by Ukraine for strikes inside Russia, as he's a lame duck with Trump taking over and the threats, and already Zelensky talking about Trump wanting peace and saying it's going to happen. Zelensky was quoted and he was saying, listen, I admit there's going to be peace. We know Ukraine has zero leverage right now. Their only leverage is the fact that NATO is giving them and supplying them with things like missiles. But this is an escalation that really didn't need to happen, considering Biden is a lame duck right now. Now, this is certainly not Biden pulling the strings. And you can say that, see, this is RFK's official account saying that there are people behind the scenes within the U.S. government, the establishment Democrats, wanting World War III before they leave the White House. You've got the Republicans' viewpoint of it being Trump is coming in. There's already been dialogue about peace between Russia and Ukraine. We know the liberals are going to swing it as appeasement to Russia, but why would you escalate things right after you got voted out and you're a lame duck with the use of these missiles? So let's understand what's going on, what is going to be happening, especially when it comes to Russia now, possibly with almost an excuse to be more aggressive against Ukraine, which would only escalate things, because we would figure if NATO is now supplying Ukraine and they are striking Russian targets inside of mainland Russia, there's going to be some big problems. Now you can see this is the estimated max range of where they could hit inside of Russia. There were talks about them potentially trying to go for Moscow. That would be a total mess. You are really talking about World War III in a situation like that, although who really knows? We can't say for sure if X, Y, and Z happens, it's going to cause World War III. This is a Russia-Ukraine thing. It's confined between those two countries. We know that NATO doesn't want to go to World War III over Ukraine itself, and NATO has been supplying Ukraine, but they've been very careful in how they interfere and what they give Ukraine, and not sending soldiers. We know that North Korea now has soldiers, in Russia trying to help them. It's a total mess. What long-range missile strikes in Russia could mean for the Ukraine war. And so you can see the U.S. decision to authorize long-range Ukrainian strikes could help Kiev defend the foothold in Russia's. So this is the region they're talking about, that little region that they have right there. They're talking about defending that with these long-range missiles that are supplied by the West, by NATO. We know the United States is going to get blamed for it because they're the figurehead of NATO, and they make up around 77% of the military budget within NATO. This is why NATO this is why Trump's talking about potentially getting out of NATO. People have asked me several times, well, Trump's going to get out of NATO. What is Trump going to do? I think it's very hard for the United States based on how they're positioned to get out of NATO at this point. What's more likely is there will be leverage that Trump knows he has, considering the United States is far more military savvy and has a huge foothold in terms of the amount of money that we've invested into the military. A lot of these other countries are going to have to start upping their funds in terms of their military defense budgets, and a lot of them already want to do that. There's a lot of Europeans that are happy that Trump won, because it means that they're actually going to have to start doing something rather than just have this crazy reliance on the United States, which really never should have existed anyways. It's this weird inorganic relationship where you're relying on a country that you're separated by an ocean by. It doesn't make any sense, with the Atlantic Ocean in between North America and Europe, but all these European countries rely on the United States and they don't want to spend their fair share in terms of military defense. You're the ones that are landlocked with Russia. You really need to start spending more money. And that's why a lot of European people are like, listen, we're happy Trump is coming in, because maybe, with Brexit, they really need to work on that and really get all those European countries together, because Trump is going to force them to pay their fair share in terms of NATO. Now, can Trump actually get out of NATO? What would that mean in terms of global instability? I think it's really hard to get out of NATO at this point. But the question here is, what does this actually mean? We're going to look at some military analysis, and then I'm going to give my take. 2 months before leaving office, Biden lifted some restrictions that have blocked Kiev from using U.S.-supplied weapon strikes deeper into Russian territory in a major policy change. And that was reported on Sunday by all the major media sites. Military analysis say the impact on the battlefield, where Ukraine has been on the back for months, would depend on what limits remain in terms of the long-range missile strikes. And again, this goes to the whole idea, well, now they're going to let them use the long-range missiles, but maybe there's more limitations on them. I would imagine there would be, even if they allow this to happen. And my guess is that, and I was reading something, this is probably a whole lot to do about nothing. Normally, with these situations where you get some type of escalation, everyone always goes doom and gloom. Oh, it's going to cause World War III. But with Trump on the doorstep of taking over, I think even if there are, NATO missiles that are hitting Russian targets inside of Russia, that's obviously a problem, and that is an escalation. But as long as Trump gets in, and Putin has talked about the fact that when Trump gets in, we will discuss peace. Russia is open to talking about peace, some type of peace deal with Trump and Ukraine. We know Russia wants NATO to back off. They want some type of agreement. If there is going to be peace, there's going to be a demilitarized zone. There's going to be, I can pretty much guarantee you, there's no way Russia's going to accept anything less than annexed territories in eastern Ukraine. There will be annexed land. Crimea, which right now is recognized by the United States as technically a Ukraine territory that's occupied by Russia, which really isn't the correct recognition. The area has been annexed. It is Russian land. That's just the reality. And it's those two regions in eastern Russia to where they have full control of the Black Sea. That's what Russia really wants right now. And I think what Russia would accept, and this is how Putin can swing it, he can say, well, listen, we've got those two regions. We've got Crimea. All that land's been annexed. And we also have an agreement with NATO. This will be part of the peace deal. The demilitarized zone is there. But we also have the fact that Ukraine will not be joining NATO for at least the next 20 years. That's or something like that. We don't know the exact length it's going to be, but I'm sure that's probably what Putin wants. It's going to be something along the lines of that. And then when it comes to Ukraine, they really have no leverage. Their only leverage is the fact that what happened to them, they view as unfair. Now, this is a very similar situation to China and Taiwan in the fact that China thinks Taiwan should be China. They think, based on the history of that land, that should be Chinese land. It's the same thing with Ukraine and Russia. Russia thinks Ukraine, and especially Eastern Russia with all those people already speaking Russian, they think that land is already there. So the dynamic is, if some peace deal happens, it's going to be swung as appeasement to Putin, and Putin's going to swing it as a victory for him because he's going to say, well, we didn't want Ukraine into NATO. I think Ukraine joining NATO anyways, the whole purpose of NATO was to make it to where tensions were not elevated. With what's happened with NATO and how far it's expanded east, and Biden brags about expanding it and bringing all these smaller European countries in, which has really caused some problems to where Russia feels threatened. And now we've got Russia invading Ukraine, and then Putin saying, well, listen, NATO expansion caused us to do this. And then you've got liberals saying, no, that's a terrible excuse. Listen, when it comes to Russia, they lost land in the early 90s because of the fall of the USSR, and they want to take it back, or at least they want some of it back in Ukraine. Now, they don't have the means to invade all of Europe. It's impossible. I mean, they're struggling to get to Kiev at this point. Sure, they haven't unleashed their full military arsenal, but it's just not going to happen. They're not that big of a threat. Their only threat is the nuke boogeyman, meaning like the idea of Putin threatening nuclear bombs. He threatened them again like a few months ago, talking about if NATO authorizes these strikes, the NATO-made missiles into Russian territory, he potentially will use nukes. That's what he said forever. My thought is, when you look at the dynamics of where we're at in 2024, the real leverage that Russia has is the fact that they're okay waging war. Because all of these European countries don't want anything to do with war. The United States wants nothing to do with war. Republicans, Democrats, I mean, I guess Democrats, they support the backing of Ukraine and trying to save Ukraine from falling into Russian hands. But overall, nobody wants war. And I'm sure a lot of Russian citizens don't want war either. But the fact of the matter is, Russia has waged this war in the 21st century with all of the nukes that we already have, and everybody is walking on thin ice. So the leverage that they have is, we've already done this, and we're going to use nukes if we have to. And then people say about the nuke threat, oh, he's just bluffing. And I thought that as well, but I also thought there was no way that Russia in 2022 was going to invade Ukraine. And I think it caught a lot of Americans off guard when that military operation, that invasion actually happened. So my viewpoint on this entire thing throughout all of it is, yes, I can understand the liberal viewpoint of weakening a foreign adversary without losing any Americans, with no American bloodshed, by just funding it, especially considering how big our military budget is. But the problem with that, and this is what liberals don't realize, is when you fund like long-range missiles, the United States is the figurehead, and this could force Russia into potentially an alliance that we don't want to see with other Eastern countries like a China, like a North Korea, like an Iran. And that's really the thing that we're looking at to potentially rival NATO, like a Warsaw Pact 2.0. But now you've got China and how powerful they are, potentially trying to take Taiwan. And I'm surprised they haven't already done it based on NATO. It's just NATO's like the big world bully. And the reason it's the big world bully is because of the United States. Like if the United States was not NATO, NATO would just be basically the EU with Canada and some other countries. But overall, I understand that this invasion is not good. I don't support the Russian invasion, but I also don't think this total support for Ukraine. And look, I know the conservative thing as well. We're giving all of our money there. Well, I mean, technically, no. When you look at our military budget, it's a very small amount that went to Ukraine for the help there. That's not, and that money was already going to be spent on military anyways. There is a benefit to spending money to help Ukraine weaken a foreign adversary. But the problem is when you're talking about an escalation, and now you're talking about these liberals elevating tensions. We're elevating tensions when we've got Trump coming in with both Zelensky and Putin talking about potential peace that's going to be happening. And there is no great peace deal for Ukraine right now. The only great thing for Ukraine would be a full commitment from NATO to go to war with Russia, which could very likely lead to World War III, but you would have NATO mount a major offensive in eastern occupied Ukraine, which is never going to happen. That's the only way they get that land back. The Ukraine does not have the troops to push back and reclaim that land against Russia. It's just not going to happen unless Russia somehow, Trump is able to bully Putin into taking a terrible peace deal, which I don't see how that's going to happen because Russia has the leverage over Ukraine. So that's really what's going on. And then, by the way, you look at what some of these military analysts are saying. They're saying it's really not going to change anything. They say it's unlikely to be a game changer, the missile strikes. The decision comes late, and like other decisions, it may not be too late to substantially change the course of the fighting. So this could be just kind of a thing that they're doing, and you read these headlines and it seems really scary, but you look into it, it's like, is it really going to change much considering Trump's taking over in like 2 months when you've already got Putin saying that he's ready to negotiate peace with Trump? I don't think this is really going to change much at all, thankfully. But it's not good that there's an escalation. I will say it's not good. They're trying to keep this very small. This is the only land that Ukraine has in Russian territory right now. All of this is Russian occupied. By the way, Russia has annexed more of this land that they do not own, which is kind of interesting. Like they've annexed like more of this land to the west. They already claim it's theirs, even though they haven't even invaded and taken it yet. But this line right here, this line in eastern Ukraine is inching very slowly west. They are inching it west. They've been doing it the past 5 or 6 months very slowly. That's Crimea right there. They want to connect that. And they want all that land to connect mainland Russia. And they want the new borders probably somewhere like right here to slice off that area of Ukraine, and then the demilitarized zone somewhere right here. So, I mean, that's all going to have to be negotiated, and we'll see what ends up happening. But listen, the negotiation is what it is. The liberal argument is, it's appeasement to Russia. But then so what do you want to do exactly? Because at a certain point, Ukraine is going to run out of men. Like that's what's going to happen. So like, I don't know what liberals want in terms of, do you just want to keep funding Ukraine until they run out of men and like manpower? And then who goes to fight for Ukraine? NATO troops go? Or do you want to launch a major offensive to try and take this land back? And then you're really talking about World War III because you need true NATO intervention, because that's the only way Ukraine is getting this land back right now for the foreseeable future, is with some type of NATO intervention with troops. They don't have the manpower to take this land back. They just don't. So that's why Trump is trying to get peace. And you know what? Maybe this is a leverage play if you are Ukraine and if you are NATO, to say, hey, listen, Trump's coming in to do a peace settlement. Maybe if we allow these missiles, that will scare Russia into accepting a worse peace deal. It's the idea of NATO saying, we don't care. We're going to, we're not scared of war, because that's really what this comes down to. That's why Putin always threatens nukes and says he's going to do all these things and it's going to be terrible. And then the West puckers up, and it's understandable why. Nobody in the West wants nuclear war. And I'm sure Russia doesn't want nuclear war either. But that's how you threaten it, to try and gain leverage with your threats and the fact that you've actually invaded. In 2022, we never thought there'd be an invasion like this. So maybe this is a leverage play by NATO. I mean, I'm trying to think it could be a leverage play by NATO to say, listen, we know Trump's coming in to negotiate peace. Let's authorize some of this stuff to maybe force Russia into a worse peace deal. Because if you're Russia, what it comes down to is how engaged is NATO in terms of this war. Like if NATO was very engaged, obviously it's a major risk because you're talking about escalation. And if you do get NATO really engaged with this war, then Russia's going to start really thinking of doing some bad things when it comes to using the nukes. But you're also talking about Russia being in a much worse position. Like make no mistake about it. NATO is significantly more powerful than Russia. That's why Russia is trying to get NATO off of its doorstep with some type of deal with Ukraine to say you cannot join NATO for the foreseeable future. We don't want bordering countries joining NATO. And so we'll have to see what ends up happening. There's a lot of different variables at play when it comes to this. But I do think there will be some type of peace deal with Trump, Putin, Zelensky. Zelensky's already said it's going to happen. To me, this is a lot to do about nothing. I understand people are scared by it, but I don't think it's really going to change much. It could actually give Ukraine leverage and NATO leverage and the West leverage in negotiating some type of peace deal with Russia, because this just comes down to the only way Russia would feel threatened and lose leverage is if NATO really says we're going to get involved. But again, we're talking about escalation then, and then maybe that does up it to where Russia starts using bigger bombs and nukes and things like that. That's where it becomes an issue. You're threading a needle. It's like a risk assessment, basically. But either way, guys, it is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.